Okay, so welcome everybody to the 2021 annual conference for the American Society of Dowsers. And this morning's talk is going to be given by Marty Lucas on what is radionics. I think most of you know who Marty is because he's been very prominent as a leader in ASD. He's a full-time radionics practitioner who specializes in producing and using powerful frequency packages to assist the body to correct causes of issues and empower it to balance. And these frequency packages form the core of his work and are in use around the world. Take it away, Marty.
Thank you, Mark. Welcome, everybody. Oh, let's see. I want to share this.
Oh, and if I could ask people to mute when you're not talking, and if you've got questions from them in the chat, you can raise your hand. Sorry, take it away a second time, Marty. Sorry.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everybody. And as Mark said, I've been doing radionics and energy work here for, oh gosh, a couple decades now. I got into this energy field the long way. My mother had been diagnosed with some medical issues, and I started studying nutrition to see what the nutritional component of those issues may have been. And what I found was that by changing some diets and adding some supplements, we could vastly improve her quality of life. I took that same knowledge then and used it in agriculture and used it in some other areas. And there were some things that nutrition didn't take care of, and that kind of led me to homeopathy. And then there were some things that homeopathy didn't take care of, and that led me to the radionics. And along the way, a gentleman by the name of Ron Ward taught me about dowsing. And since then, dowsing has been a major portion, not only of my business, but of just my everyday life. I don't think of dowsing and radionics as anything mystical or mystical. It's just something that I do. And I don't give it much more thought than I would brushing my teeth or tying my shoes. I don't feel that it is something that only a few of us have. It's my belief that it's something that we can all do, and it's a skill that we can all learn. But when it comes to radionics and dowsing, people often wonder, what is the difference? And so I'm going to start right from the get-go with my standard disclaimer. I am not a doctor. I cannot diagnose, prescribe, or treat. And radionics is not a medical modality. If you're sick, go to a doctor, and don't confuse radionics with medicine. They are not the same. And if you're trying to do medical work with radionics, you don't understand radionics. And that's where we start. But radionics and dowsing are really second cousins. They use the same energy field. And in a nutshell, radionics uses left brain instrumentation to do right brain work. There is nothing that you can do with radionics that you cannot do with your other energy modalities, including dowsing, provided that you have the focus and the persistence in that focus to be able to get the reality around you resonate with your intent. And sadly, most of us have the attention span of a gnat. They tell us that if we could hold a single thought for as little as 2 minutes, that we could manifest whatever we're thinking in the palm of our hands. And that tells me that the majority of us are only 58 seconds away from having a gold bar materialize in our hands. But what we're talking about with the radionics and with the dowsing is we're talking about scalar science. And I'll get into more of the technical aspects and some of the details about why and how that works. It's taken us a long time to get to the point where we actually understand and have the science to explain why our dowsing works and why the radionics works. And it has to do with quantum mechanics. It has to do with the fact that we live in a holographic universe where everything is connected. And all of the stuff that we see around us is not really stuff. The stuff that we see around us is really just light and a mixture of frequencies of those different light patterns as they interfere with each other. That science tells us that all of the information in this holographic universe is contained in every part of it. What they don't tell us is what controls that hologram. But in my view, what controls that hologram is our consciousness. And each one of us has our own little bit of consciousness. And that is produced with a scalar mind. Our brain doesn't think in radio waves. Our brain thinks in scalar waves. And if you think of a scalar wave, it is a frequency pattern that has no direction. So if you walk into a room and it's 72 degrees in that room, that's kind of what we're talking about as a scalar wave. Scalar waves don't obey time or distance. And as you know, with our minds, we can think about the past, we can think about the future, and we can even think about somebody that is a continent away. And while we're thinking about them, they may even call us. That is our scalar mind reaching out across the dimensions and making that connection. That is that part of everything is connected. Now, the high school science that we learned and that most of us carry around is not only incomplete, but it's also incorrect. Newton saw the universe as a machine. What we're seeing is it is not a machine. In the double slit experiment with light, they found that light can be either a wave or a particle. And depending upon what they were expecting, actually affected their results. And what we found in science, and this is hard science, is that the observer is always connected with the experiment and the observer influences the result. And that changes everything. When you begin to think about it, that when you're having an experiment or when you're interacting with anything, you are getting some of, if not all of, what you expect. Your consciousness is engaged in your reality. And that kind of explains what we learned when we studied under Raymond Grace. And Raymond doesn't use dowsing as a passive tool just to gather information, but you certainly can. But he uses it as an active tool in order to manipulate energy patterns, because he knows that his consciousness is connected and that he can manipulate those energy patterns. And the big difference between Raymond Grace and most of his students is that when Raymond goes out to try something, he knows it will work. And many of us, when we sat in his class, just thought maybe we could do it. But over time, if you've experimented with his techniques, you found that you can do it too. Consciousness is the key. And our thoughts are real. A couple years ago, I talked about who answers our dowsing questions. And that absolutely goes back to how we are connected in this reality. Our thoughts are real things. They have a real energy pattern. And that pattern either resonates with the reality around us or it doesn't resonate with the reality around us. When we ask a dowsing question, if it resonates with reality, it comes back a little stronger. And we pick that up with our dowsing tools as a yes. If it doesn't resonate with reality, we pick that up with our dowsing tools and it comes back a little bit quieter, and that comes back as a no. That's because the reality we live in is a combination of energy and information. And even our thoughts are things, and they cause resonance with the things around us. And so since we can affect the environment around us with our thoughts, and since our thoughts are scalar frequency patterns, what I'm able to do with the instruments is use what we understand of electricity and the fact that with every electrical signal, there is an electrical component, a magnetic component, and a scalar component. And so I can tune my radionic instrument into the scalar pattern of that thought. And then I can test to see if that scalar pattern resonates or it doesn't resonate. Now, the advantage of using a radionic instrument is when I set that instrument, it doesn't get confused. It doesn't wander off. It doesn't get distracted. Now, the disadvantage with a radionic instrument over using your own intent is that radionic instrument is, by simple design, only able to capture fairly simple patterns, nothing near as complex as the human thought. But many times the patterns are complex enough to make real world differences. We're connected to everything, and everything is part of us. And so we affect everything around us, and everything around us affects us. We know this. We know that in our dowsing. We know that in our meetings. You walk into a room and either you feel like you are part of the crowd and everything is hunky-dory, or you feel like, oh, you know, something's just off. Sometimes you walk into a building and it just doesn't feel right. And there's other times when you walk into a building and it just feels, you can feel the love, the light, and the compassion that is just oozing from that building. Sometimes that same energy is in a book. So let's say you pick up the book, Money, Come Dance With Me. You just pick it up and hold that book, and you can feel the energy coming from that book because you are connected to that energy. And in dowsing, we've learned to feel that. We've learned to reach out and touch it. And in radionics, we use our instruments to do that.
The energy field of a living thing is called its morphogenic field. It's a very complex fractal pattern. Nutrients add to the pattern, toxins interfere with it. Too much interference and the pattern is degraded. We call that sickness and aging. If the interference patterns multiply, the body becomes unhealthier until the pattern disintegrates and the body dies. The more coherent a system, the more efficient it becomes. That's because it isn't wasting energy with internal dissonance. An automobile engine is an excellent example. Perfectly tuned, it may get 30 miles per gallon. But even if only one cylinder is firing at the wrong time, the engine loses power and efficiency. If the malfunction is severe enough, the engine will destroy itself. Take a beautiful coherent crystal. It's strong, it's stable. But if there is even a minor flaw, the crystal can easily be broken along the fault line. In life, we see individuals that are never ill and they don't seem to age. Then there are others that are sick all of the time and seem to catch every infection that comes down the road. It's not bad luck. It is the coherence in their systems.
In our work, whether it's radionics or in active dowsing, what we're doing is we're manipulating energy patterns. We are supporting the energy patterns we want to be stronger. We are suppressing the energy patterns that we want to be weaker. I simply do that with my instrumentation, but as active dowsers, you can do it as well. So if you've got an issue with soybean aphids in the cornfield, you want to suppress the frequency of that soybean aphid at the same time while you're supporting the frequencies of the health of that plant. To do that with dowsing would require a tremendous amount of your own personal life force, a lot of attention to detail, and concentrating on your intent. But when I set my instrument, it can continue to work and clear the aphids from that entire field, whether that field is 40 acres or 400 acres. Because everything is energy and information. When you have enough energy, you can change the information. You know, a way to think of it is that if there's energy patterns out there, that each energy pattern will have a certain force with it or a certain voltage. And I know voltage isn't the right word, but I like to use the label voltage because it gives me something that I can really wrap my mind around. So if I've got an energy pattern that is stored at 5 volts and I want to change that, but I'm trying to change it with something that only has 2 volts, I'm not going to be able to make that change. In the ancient Huna tradition, if the Huna master didn't have at least an energy of 400, he was not allowed to do any healing. And if the client didn't have an energy of at least 200, they said that he didn't have enough energy to hold the information. And so there's no sense working on somebody that had less than 200. And again, it's energy and information. We can gather that personal energy when we do our dowsing to make those changes, or we can use an instrument to do that for us. Now, as we're looking at making these changes and suppressing the fields we want to suppress and support the ones we want to support, remember, nature always bats last. In my last class, I pointed out that, when you've got dandelions that are growing in the field, that dandelion is a calcium weed. And weed is definitely the wrong label for a dandelion, but we call it weed. And that dandelion is bringing calcium up to the surface of the soil. If we go out and we kill that dandelion, thistles will come in, and thistles also are calcium weeds. And the thistles are designed to bring in that calcium from the subsoil. If we kill the thistle without solving the problem, then we get poison ivy. We kill the poison ivy, then we get thistle trees or thorn trees. That's because we didn't look at what the cause of the issue was. We were looking at the symptom. And as long as we look at the world as a bunch of symptoms and we address symptom after symptom, we will always end up peeling the onion and we will never find the cause behind the cause. When you find that cause behind the cause, typically it takes very little energy to make changes at that level, but it takes an extremely tight focus and an extremely detailed intent. Radionics is getting on, gosh, it's nearly 100 years old now. And the number of pioneers in the radionics field continues to grow. These people, many of them, when they made their breakthroughs, were all honored to a great degree until they began to actually interfere with some of the other structures in society, and then they were labeled as cranks or labeled as quacks or labeled as gods. But I guarantee you that none of these men or women were any of those. The majority of them were phenomenal healers, and some of them are still here as phenomenal healers, phenomenal researchers. And what they studied was the practical aspects of energy and information. And it's all energy and information.
Living systems are largely so.
Sorry about that. I'm just going to skip that. Now, how does the witness work? Now, in dowsing, typically, when we're working with somebody one-on-one, many times they're right in front of us. But with radionics, we use something called a witness. And so I'll take a hair sample or a picture or a blood sample or a soil sample, or I'll even take samples of the tissue or the pathogens or the bugs or whatever. If I've got an issue where the animals are ill, I may even take a sample of the discharge that I will use as a witness. And that witness is what I use to connect to the client. And when I was first introduced to the idea of the witness, I was reminded of voodoo. Oh my gosh. I mean, you got the voodoo doll and you do this to the doll and it goes back and it affects the client. That whole mythology, if you will, is based on scientific and practical application of the entanglement principle. Quantum science now tells us that once two electrons have touched, they are connected forever. And once they're connected, whatever happens to one electron will happen to the other. And so they can trace them no matter how far apart they are. They make a change on one, it automatically and instantly changes on the other one. That is the concept behind a witness. That's why I can take a picture of the client. I can do a full analysis and find out exactly where the mineral and the pH content is. I can take a look at the pathogens. I can take a look at the function of the different organs. I can take a function of the measurement of the function of the different tissues. And then I can find those things that will support optimal organ function or optimal tissue function or even optimal digestion, and I can broadcast that. And it doesn't make any difference whether the client is sitting in my office or that client is sitting in Shanghai. It's still instant, because with that picture, I have that connection. You may already know that in your dowsing when you can simply pick up a picture of somebody that you love and you make that connection, you feel that connection with them. What you feel is real. It's just that in radionics, we use that every day. So I can use pictures, I can use satellite, they can be copied, they can be printed, they can be projected. And once I have that picture, I have the connection with that area. So in this particular picture, I've got a connection with all of the plants that are in that field. I also have a picture that it connects with the soil in that field. So since this picture is several years old, I'm really not going to be able to do much to affect the plants that are in this picture because they're long gone, but I can still use this picture to balance the soil. I can still use this picture to analyze, to see what the soil profile looks like. I can use this picture to go ahead and analyze to see if there are curses on this soil, to see if the biology in the soil is working as well as it should. And I can also use this picture to broadcast additional frequencies if there's a problem with additional calcium or magnesium or strontium or whatever. And with this picture, after a rain, I can do an analysis and see what was in that rain that's currently affecting my field. Because even though this picture was several years old, it is still connected with that field. So even if that picture of your loved one is 10 years old, it's still connected with your loved one. You can pick up that picture, do a quick analysis, and you could find just exactly what is going on with them right now. And with many clients, some of them that I haven't heard from several years, when they have an issue, they'll call me and I pull out their file that may be several years old, and I can do a quick analysis with the equipment that I've got right behind me and find out, what's going on, what pathogens may be a problem there. Are they dehydrated? Is there a nutritional issue? Is there a toxin issue? Is there an emotional issue? And sometimes what they really need is just some additional emotional support. Maybe throw the Ho'oponopono their direction, or a little love, light, compassion. Because each one of those concepts also has its own frequency. If you can think of it, it has a frequency. If it has a frequency, we can capture that frequency. If we can capture that frequency, we can record that frequency and then broadcast it when we need it. And the issue with any of those frequencies and any of those thoughts is that as we form that thought, it must be specific enough and it must be clear enough so that we can get a good frequency pattern from it. So for instance, when I go to broadcast love, I don't think of love as rainbows and unicorns. I think of love as the unimpeded flow of energy and information. And so when I am broadcasting love, I'm not broadcasting an unclear picture. I am broadcasting the frequency of unimpeded flow of energy and information. I also broadcast grace, ease, Ho'oponopono, bless, home. And as my practice has developed, I have found that I do much less work in the physical and much more work in the energetic fields. And what I found is that everything in our physical has an energetic root, and we need to find what that energetic root is if we're going to make permanent changes in the physical. And so one of the very first things that I broadcast, even to a field like this one, is an ancient poem of love, gratitude, and forgiveness. I broadcast the Ho'oponopono. I'm sorry, please forgive me, thank you, I love you. The reason that I broadcast that poem is because it works. When I broadcast that poem, what I have found is that the life in the soil responds to that poem. And as the life in the soil responds to that poem, the soil balances itself. The soil corrects those deficiencies. And so I don't have to be an expert in mineral status and levels and ratios throughout the soil. I don't have to be an expert in medical. I don't have to be an expert in any particular detailed area. When you're working at the base cause level, you don't have to be an expert. And at base cause level, many times starts with love. I don't have to use current pictures because they are always connected. Okay, now let's talk about the energy, because energy is, well, and I think we've all done this when we've done our active dowsing. When we've gone to make changes in the atmosphere around us, and we pick up our dowsing tool and we get it to spin in that clockwise direction as we're adding energy to it. And sometimes we simply don't have enough energy to do that. The tighter your focus, the less energy you need. And the advantage of the radionic instrument is I can get a very tight focus, and that is what builds the resonance in the field. And then I can use an electronic amplifier to amplify that. The tighter your focus, the less energy you need. Okay? Because again, it's all energy and information. My instruments work whether I'm there or not. Recently, I was out of town for a week, and all the instruments in my lab continue to function just as they should. My intent was stabilized. The readings on the instrument didn't change, and they continued to produce that same consistent resonant energy field. And so even though my instrument cannot capture as complex a thought form as we can produce in our head, I can overcome that with the stability and simply keeping that same frequency broadcasting over a long period of time. Think of it this way. If I place a small magnet next to the navigating compass of a ship, and I move that compass, say 1 degree, right before that ship leaves England on its way to America, that 1 degree over that many thousands of miles will put that ship completely off course. So if I can make a small change over a long period of time, I can end up making a bigger result than trying to do a large change all at once. The other advantage of using low power small changes is that I don't get pushback. I don't get a reaction. And I learned this years ago when I was studying how HIV spread. And the way HIV works is that it slowly uses the selenium in your system. And it is a low-grade, fairly innocuous infection that is using the selenium that your T cells need in order to function in your immune system. When the infection finally gets large enough to trigger your immune system, the HIV has already used all the selenium that your T cells need to fight it. It makes a small change over a long period of time and bypasses all of your defenses. So as you're doing your work, you might want to think of that as a model. It's a model that nature uses all the time. Rather than trying to do something major and make a major change all at once, where you'll get lots of resistance and pushback and reaction, those small changes make bigger differences over the long run. Just as in dowsing, radionics is a two-way communication as well. We often think that when we're dowsing that we are simply accepting information, and that when we put down our dowsing tool that the connection is gone. Everybody right now, I want you to pull out your dowsing tools. I want you to check to see how many non-mutually beneficial connections you have right now. How many non-mutually beneficial connections do you have right now? Now, you could have a good connection with somebody and they've got a bad connection with you. That means it's a non-mutually beneficial connection. If you have an energetic connection with somebody that is not beneficial for both of you, well, that's an excellent question, and it opens up more questions for you. When you dowse, you make a connection. When you think of somebody or something, you make a connection. Just because you're not thinking of that person right now does not mean that that connection is not still there. If that connection is still there, it can be reopened and energy and information can flow along that connection. It can flow to you, it can flow away from you. But if you have a non-mutually beneficial connection, your next question you may want to ask is why? When you make that dowsing, you're making that connection. With radionics, we make those connections as well. The advantage of radionics, when I make that connection, it is the instrument that's making that connection and not my energy field. So if anybody came up with an answer other than 0, the way I cut those connections is I just visualize a great big pair of shears and I cut that connection. And then what I like to do is just tie a knot in those cords. It is something that I try to do at least once a week, especially when you're doing a lot of work, you're doing a lot of dowsing, and you're doing a lot of reaching out and a lot of energy work. It's easy to accumulate dozens, if not hundreds, of non-mutually beneficial connections. And so, again, one of the reasons I like using the radionics is if that instrument is connected, it's not using my life force, it's not tapping into my life force. With any of our work, are we looking at a cause or are we looking at effect? If you have a headache, chances are it is not a symptom of an aspirin deficiency. And if you are simply treating symptoms, you will continue to treat symptoms ad infinitum. They call it peeling the onion. I mean, how many times have we run across somebody that they seem to get sick from everything? So the first cold that comes through in the fall, they get sick. The second cold, they get sick. The third cold, they get sick. When the flu comes through, they get sick. When they go to the doctor, they get sick. When they go to the kids' recital, they get sick. Rather than treating all those individual infections, a better approach may be to find out what is the problem. Why is the immune system not responding as it should? And that really is the difference between the allopathic and the holistic approach. You go to your doctor, he's going to do a detailed analysis, or your physical, and then he's going to analyze, and he's going to come up with something that to treat those symptoms, and he's going to peel the onion. Or we can look at all those issues as energetic issues. We can find out what that cause behind the cause is, and then we can resolve that and all the unknown issues. When I mentioned the Ho'oponopono, the story that I always say with that is when I went to balance a farm field in Illinois. And rather than balancing each one of the more than 200 minerals and mineral combinations, I balanced it with just the Ho'oponopono. I just broadcast the Ho'oponopono to that field. And what I noticed is that everything that I knew to balance balanced itself. And that told me if everything that I know to balance would balance itself, then everything that I didn't know was changing as well. That told me that I didn't have to have the detailed chemical, biological, and physiological knowledge of how all of the life in that soil interacted, because nature already knows that. I don't have to understand all the details of the immune system in the animal. The immune system already knows that. I don't have to understand all of the details of the biology of that plant. The plant already knows that. If I can find the cause behind the cause and address that cause, nature will take care of itself. Even with the current drama and the affection that is sweeping this nation, think of it this way. The fact that we are sitting here today means that our ancestors survived every single infection that has come down the pike since humanity has walked this planet. That means that we've survived tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands, perhaps millions of different infections. Your immune system knows how to fight infections. So does it make sense to understand the details and work on the individual problems with one particular infection? Well, certainly there may be times when you want to do that, especially if it's an emergency. But overall, rather than try to take that responsibility away from my immune system, how about I empower my immune system, find out what is keeping it from functioning as well as it should, so that it can continue to provide the same support that it has supported humanity since the beginning of time. Maybe the problem with the immune system is nutritional. Maybe it's toxins. Maybe the problem with the immune system not working properly is emotional or even spiritual. If you ask the wrong question, you will always get the wrong answer. But if you don't ask any questions, then you don't get any answers whatsoever. Dowsing allows us to ask the question. And in my work, what the radionics allows me to do is address that question after I've found that. Okay. I always try to support natural processes, right down to the soil itself. And sometimes the things that are interfering with that natural process are the thoughts that are between your ears, or maybe the thoughts that have resonated with the soil, or thoughts that are resonating with the building you're in, or even the room, or even the furniture. Thoughts are things. Thoughts have energy. That energy can cause a resonance in the reality around you. And so that mud hole back on the creek bottom that my grandfather got stuck in and swore about, and that my father got stuck and swore, and that my brothers got stuck and swore, and that I got stuck and swore, and we've all sworn at that mud hole, because it never shows itself until you're in the middle of it and you're stuck. Maybe all of those little curses, which by themselves didn't have very much energy at all, I mean, not in the grand scheme of things, but when you take all those little curses through all of those different people, through all of those years, maybe those curses are interfering with the biology in that area from balancing itself and from keeping the water from flowing like it should in that particular area. So maybe rather than cursing that mud hole, We need to clear the energy patterns of those curses out of it and replace it with love, light, compassion, or the Ho'oponopono. Many of you may look at that and go, okay, that is the weirdest woo-woo BS I have ever heard. Okay, fine. Try it. If it doesn't work for you, that's fine. But until you try it, you won't know. And the one thing that the American Society of Dowsers has taught me, if nothing else, is that even though it may be really, really weird to my left logical brain, I don't know if it's real until I try it. If I try it and it works, I've lost nothing. But if I simply dismiss it out of hand and never try it, then I've lost the opportunity to know whether it was real or not, haven't I? From my experience on my farm, I know that if I clear the curses from those areas of the farm that have been cursed, and I'm not talking about the grand curses that we hear about where the native is protecting the sacred grounds. I'm talking about the little curses. Once I clear those little curses, the land heals itself. And if you really want to have some fun, take a thorn tree and broadcast the Ho'oponopono, or simply unconditional love, or love, light, and compassion, or whatever, in that area, and watch how many fewer thorns that tree will have the next year. The thorns that are there will still be there, but you'll notice that the new growth will have fewer thorns. That's one of the cool things that I can do with Radionics, is because I can broadcast a low-level frequency pattern and let it broadcast over a long period of time, so it'll make those little changes. And so I've absolutely tried it to see what would happen. I was very happy with the result. I absolutely clear the curses from my property. And I clear the curses from my own body. Many times, we're the ones that interfere with our own health. You know, and if you think about it, our body is what makes us healthy, and it's our brain is what oftentimes makes us sick. How many times have you walked into an organizational meeting and, you know, whether it's the Shriners or the Masons or the whatever, it may even be the PTA, and oh my gosh, it's like an organ recital. Everybody's talking about, well, I've got this problem with the organ, and I've got that problem with the organ, and you think that's bad. Well, yeah, I've got this, and they're talking about all the things that are wrong with their bodies. Or maybe you've had somebody that talks about their bad knee or their bad ankle, or how their family has always had bad hearts, or whatever. Each time they mention that, heavens, each time they think about it, it's only adding a little bit of energy to that curse. But when they talk to me about it, and I form a thought form based upon their bad knee, I've just added energy to that curse as well. So when they talk about it, all they did was make it worse. So instead of talking about how their knee is healing and how much better it is and how much stronger it is, what they've done by spreading the news is they also made it worse. They added energy to that information. And we're all part of the same system. You know, I talked about the dandelions, you know, they're growing, that are doing the calcium, but dandelions are also a phenomenal detoxifier. So if you've got dandelions growing in your front yard, there's an excellent chance that those dandelions are not growing there just to balance the soil, but they may be growing there to help you as well. If you've got a bunch of dandelions in your front yard, I would double check to see what your calcium levels are, or to see if your liver needs to be detoxed. What if, instead of those plants out there in the yard being out there in the yard, what if those plants that are out there in the yard are actually part of a larger system that is trying to support you. What if, when we're putting that poison on the yard so it's nice and green, we're actually killing the messenger? Now, let's suppose you do a complete analysis and you find out that no, that I don't need extra calcium and my liver's in good shape and blah, blah, blah. Well, your investigation cost you nothing. But if you do that same investigation, you find out that you are connected and that front yard is trying to support your life and wellness, then you begin looking at the rest of the system as well. Longtime veterinarians will tell you that if a pet comes in with a problem, that if you don't take a look and see what's going on with the owner of that pet, you will not be able to heal that pet. And that when that pet passes, within days or weeks or maybe even but in a very short time, that the owner of that pet will also suffer from that same issue that the pet was carrying. It's as if that pet was carrying that disease on behalf of the owner to protect that owner. Now again, you can throw that out as woo-woo, or you can test it. If you test it and you find out that it's true, when your dog has issues, what better time to look at your own health as well? Now, the first things that I tell them is to take care of themselves. You come first. When we have that instrument sitting on our machine, we can do, sitting on our desk, we can do wonderful things. We can change the world, but you cannot change the world if you're not here. And as you raise your frequency, the ones around you will come along, and the ones that don't resonate with that frequency will go someplace to where they will resonate. As you take care of yourself, you are saving the world. I think that's one of the things that in Hawkins and his levels of consciousness, what he found was that the people with the very highest levels of consciousness were able to affect tens of thousands and hundreds of thousands of people around them. And so instead of taking on those projects where you can save the world, raising your frequency and taking care of you is probably one of the most important things that you can do for your community and for your world. The other thing you'll notice that as your frequency rises, your perspective rises as well. For those of you that have been dowsing and in the Dowsing Society for a period of time, look at the number of people that have left your life and the people that have come into your life. Look at how those things change. Look at the things that you have simply accepted as, well, that was normal maybe 10 years ago, that you're absolutely repelled by today. Think about it. Of your closest friends, how many have been with you for 40 years, 50 years? There may be one or two, but the majority of the people that you knew as a young person, as somebody just getting out of high school, or even that in college, the majority of those people have completely different lives now. And the people that are in your life right now are more like you than those people ever were. I recently moved from town back to my hometown farm, and we've been living out here now for, during the latest drama. And so I go into the local chiropractor, and the chiropractor is a daughter of a high school with, and which I thought was really neat. And I was talking to the old gal that was at the front desk, and she says, "Well, Marty, do you remember me?" And no. She goes, "Well, we were in the same class." I thought, oh my, things have changed. But, it's been over 40 years, getting close to 50 years. And the things that we had in common 50 years ago, we certainly don't have in common today. As you're getting ready to work, we know this from dowsing. We know how to get things going for dowsing. It's absolutely the same thing with radionics. You know, when you're doing the radionic work, you want to be hydrated properly. You want to be properly grounded. You want to maximize your energy, which means you're not going to be eating a bunch of junk food before you go to work. You know, you want to, get your chakras working properly. You can even hug a tree and get yourself grounded. Yeah, it's absolutely the same as in radionics. Okay. And we do want to study. And the reason that we want to study is not so that we become experts in all things great and small. The reason that we want to do that studying is because it allows us to ask better questions. If there's one thing that interferes with radionics professionals and dowsers as well, it isn't that we don't know, it's we don't know the right question. And the best dowser is not the one that asks the best question necessarily. It's oftentimes the one that asks the most questions. The more questions that you ask, the closer you're going to get. Okay, I want to close out with what my radionic equipment looks like. This is a basic tuning station. It looks like an old-timey radio. And the reason it looks like an old-timey radio is because it frankly is more like an old-time radio than anything else. Each one of those dials tunes just like the dials on the old radios. And it goes into a radio circuit, and then the magic in the radionics is actually in the Tesla antenna on the back end. And what that Tesla antenna does is it screens out the radio frequencies, so you're only broadcasting or only receiving the scalar frequencies. Each one of those pairs of dials we call a bank, and we dial that into a frequency. And when I can add more banks, it's like adding more voices in the choir or adding more instruments in the orchestra. So the more banks that I can add, the richer the signal. And that's why in my lab, I've got a number of these. This is a small potentizer, a replicator. It allows me to take the information, or take the frequency information and copy it into things. And so I can copy it into crystals. I can copy it into my drink. I can copy and make radionic homeopathic preparations with it. Okay. Same type of thing, only that's an accessory one. Okay. All right. Let's get, all right. What I would like to do at this time is go ahead and let's open up the lines for questions, and that way I can answer some questions for anybody that, there we go. All right.
And Marty, you already have one from Sandra Oliveri, who wants to know if you've got any books to suggest, and also if you offer any online courses.
I don't, on my website, radionics.us, I've got some free audios that people can download. I've got a couple of online courses. An excellent book for beginning radionics is from a fellow by the name of Pete Rodati, and if you just do an Amazon search for Pete Rodati, and it is, I think he calls it a simple course in beginning radionics. And I've got those pasted on my, I've got those links on my Every Advantage Facebook page. And if you just email me at marty@radionics.us, I can get you those links. Lots of good information out there. If you want to go to kellyresearchtech.com, kellyresearchtech.com, there's a tremendous amount of resources there as well. The United States Psychotronics Association has, just as the ASD has 60 years of archives of dowsers, psychotronics.org has about that many years of radionics and energy work. So I can get all of those links to you. Just drop me an email, or there it is. There's the psychotronics.org. Lots of resources out there. But Pete Rodati's book is an excellent one to begin with. Did that answer your question? Any other questions or comments? Thank you. With radionics, there are people out there that would sell you instruments that start at several $1,000s and go up from there. And there's other people that will tell you that you can do the same thing with a paper instrument. Now, all of that is probably true, but the real bottom line with any of the radionics, if this is something you're interested in, find somebody that can train you and support you and help you. Going to eBay and buying an instrument, many people end up buying those instruments and then they end up being in the closet. And if you buy an instrument and it ends up in a closet, then it does nothing for anybody. If you buy an instrument through Kelly and I can help you train it and use it, great. If you buy it from one of my competitors and they can help you train and use it, that's great too. It is a phenomenal energy modality. And any dowser that's out there, if you can dowse, you can certainly use radionics. And with the radionics, it just simply opens up an entirely new vista of what you can add. All right, any other questions or comments?
Actually, Marty, if I can just comment, because I know I sat on the sidelines for a number of years while you talked about radionics, thinking, I'm not so sure about the paper instruments, and I'm not sure I want to plunk down the cost of a Kelly instrument. And I have to say, I am so glad that I got my Kelly instrument and that I went to the workshop that you and Ed did, because I learned a lot, and it's in use almost 24/7. It's really made a big difference for me and for Gail. Gail, I don't know if you want to unmute and say something as well, because you went and bought an instrument too.
I think the other thing I want to talk about is the reagents that you have created, Marty, that are really profound and powerful. And that's one of the reasons my book dowses out so high, dowses out at 903, because I radiated it with Ho'oponopono, compassion, grace, love, and a number of other reagents that you've created. And that's what I think one of the most powerful things that you can do with radionics is download the frequencies and fractals of, so for example, love 2020, and then have access to that energy and begin to kind of radiate it out into whatever it is that you're working with. And Ho'oponopono in particular is really, really a powerful reagent. And maybe you can say a few words, Marty, about just what exactly a reagent is, because I think that that's a really powerful tool that you use. And I've had the benefit of being able to have access to those reagents.
Well, and a reagent is really just a frequency package. And so we all have worked with crystals, and a crystal will have a certain, we know that the rose quartz will hold a certain frequency. And we know that different gems will hold different frequencies. And we even know that, with the different singing bowls, each one of those singing bowls will have its own frequency, will have its own energy impact. What I've been able to do is take some of those frequency packages and imprint them into, in my case, crystal rods, so that you can have and hold that rod, either broadcast it or simply sit there and enjoy the frequency. So recently I had a friend that was having some regular day-to-day issues. Things weren't going right, and and I think we've all had those dark days. And I got her to bring in the frequencies of heart's desire and soul's desire, and bring those together and hold them together. And this is absolutely an inspiration from Gail, but when you bring your heart and soul desire together, it is very difficult to be depressed, because those two just simply work together. That doesn't make me an expert on heart's desire. It doesn't make me an expert on soul's desire. And it certainly doesn't make me an expert on, in many of the other things, but I am able to capture some of these frequency patterns and then use them and take what works best and go from there.
So any other questions from anybody, or Marty, final comments from you?
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining me this morning. It's been a pleasure and an honor. It's good to see old friends. Thank you, Gail, Mark, and Susan. Good to see you as well, and Sandy. If you didn't get everything you needed from this presentation this morning, I am sorry. Please forgive me. But thank you. I love you.
I love you too.
Love you too,
Bye,
Marty.
Marty.